While renovating my late parents' house, I found a metal box hidden in the wall. Inside was a letter. If you read this, check the basement. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The house smelled like death, though they had been dead for 8 months. I stood in the doorway of my childhood home, hand still on the frame, unable to cross the threshold. The air was thick with dust, and something else, something like the memory of old wood, of closed windows, of people who stopped living but didn't quite leave. The afternoon light cut through the gap in the curtains, revealing particles suspended in the stale air like tiny ghosts. It was June. The real estate agent had given me 2 weeks to clear the house before listing it. 2 weeks to dismantle 34 years of living, to sort through the accumulated weight of a family, to decide what deserved to survive and what should disappear. My father had been a quiet man. Not silent, he spoke when necessary, in clipped sentences that carried absolute authority. But he was quiet in a deeper sense. Quiet in the way that made you feel like he was always watching, calculating, waiting for you to make a mistake. He died of a heart attack while reading in his study. They found him in his leather chair, one hand still holding the book, as if he'd just paused to consider a particular passage. My mother was different. She moved through the house like water, present but not quite real. She smiled, but the smiles never reached her eyes. She asked questions without seeming to want answers. She prepared meals with mechanical precision, her hands moving through routines so ingrained they seemed to operate independently of her mind. 3 years after my father died, she followed him. The doctors called it pneumonia. I called it giving up. I finally stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight, a sound I remembered from childhood, that particular creak near the hallway that my father had always meant to fix but never did. Nothing had changed. The furniture was arranged exactly as it had been in 1989, when I'd left for university and never really come back. The photographs on the mantel were the same, my parents on their wedding day, both unsmiling, as if they were posing for a court document rather than a portrait. Me as a child, frozen at various ages, captured mid-expression like a specimen pinned to a board. I opened the windows. The air that rushed in was warm and alive, and it made the house feel even more like a tomb. The renovation work was supposed to be simple. Paint, carpet, maybe update the kitchen. Enough to make the place appealing to buyers without requiring me to spend more than necessary. I wasn't sentimental about the house. I'd spent my entire adult life creating distance from it, from them, from the particular kind of silence that had always filled these rooms. But the universe, I was learning, has a sense of irony. It happened on the 3rd day. I was removing an old wardrobe from the master bedroom, a massive thing, dark oak, probably worth something to an antique dealer, when I noticed something odd about the wall behind it. The wallpaper didn't quite match. There was a seam, barely visible, where 2 different patterns met at an angle that didn't align with the room's geometry. I pulled the wardrobe further from the wall. The hinges protested. Dust clouds rose like troubled spirits. Behind it, the wallpaper was bubbled and discolored, as if water had been trapped behind it for years. When I pressed my hand against it, I felt something solid underneath. Not plaster, something else. My heart began to move in a way I didn't like. I found a knife and carefully peeled back the damaged wallpaper. Layer after layer came away, revealing older patterns beneath flowers, stripes, geometric designs from decades past, each one a ring in the tree of this house's history. And then I saw it. Metal. A corner of something, rust brown and deliberately concealed. It took me an hour to expose it fully. A metal box, perhaps 30 centimeters across, with a hasp and a padlock that had long since seized shut. The rust came away in flakes under my fingers, staining my skin the color of old blood. I didn't have a key. I found a hammer and a chisel in my father's toolbox. Of course they were there, organized with military precision, and pried the lock open. It broke with a sound like something finally surrendering. Inside the box, protected by yellowed wax paper, were letters. Dozens of them. And on top of the stack, written in my father's precise hand, was an envelope with a single sentence. "If you read this, check the basement." I stood there for what might have been minutes or hours. The room had begun to darken as the sun moved across the sky. Dust motes hung in the amber light. My hands were shaking. I told myself I wouldn't go. I told myself that some boxes are meant to stay sealed, that some doors are locked for a reason, that my parents' secrets were their own and none of my concern. I told myself this for approximately 5 minutes while I gathered my courage. Then I went downstairs. The basement had always been forbidden when I was a child. Not explicitly, my father never said the words, "You cannot go down there." But the message was clear in the way he would close the door firmly behind him, in the way my mother would quietly redirect me if I approached the stairs, in the way neither of them ever mentioned what was down there or why it required such vigilance. The stairs descended into darkness. I found the light switch, the same brass switch, still in the same place, and pushed it. Nothing. The bulb had burned out years ago, probably, and no one had bothered to replace it. I used my phone's flashlight instead, and the beam carved a tunnel through the black. The air was cool and damp, with a sour undertone like something had rotted in the corners and left a permanent smell. My footsteps echoed. The basement had always felt larger in darkness, as if the shadows added dimensions that weren't really there. The walls sweated. Moisture beaded on the concrete in a way that made my skin crawl. There were boxes stacked against one side, old storage boxes with labels in my mother's handwriting, winter clothes, Christmas decorations, books, mundane inventories of ordinary life. But in the far corner, beyond the boxes, I saw what I was looking for. The wall there was different. It had been bricked up. Not recently. The mortar between the bricks was old, the color of aged bone, but deliberately. Someone had built a wall to seal something inside, or to hide something away. The flashlight beam wavered in my trembling hands. I moved closer. The wall was solid, mortared with the kind of care that suggested professional work. But behind it, I could see the edge of something large. Wood, I thought. Furniture, maybe? I reached out and touched the bricks. They were cold and slightly damp, covered in a thin film of mold. I pressed my ear against them and heard nothing. No hollow sounds, no secrets whispering through the darkness. That's when I noticed the loose brick. It was about 2 meters up, to the left of the sealed wall's edge. The mortar around it was fresher than the rest, which meant it had been replaced recently. I had to stand on an old paint can to reach it, and even then I could barely get my fingers around it. But it came free after a few moments of work, and with it came a draft of stale air and something else, a faint, sickly sweet smell that I recognized from biology class, and nowhere else I'd ever wanted to recognize it. Behind the brick was a cavity, and in the cavity was a metal box, smaller than the one upstairs, but heavier, and a key. I knew what was on the other side of that bricked wall. Some part of me had always known. The knowledge had been waiting in me like a seed, growing quietly in the dark spaces between my conscious thoughts. I used the key on the hasp. The lock opened easily. This one had been maintained, kept functional. The box contained photographs, old ones, faded, from a time before color film had become standard. They showed a woman I didn't recognize, young and beautiful, with dark hair and eyes that held a specific kind of sadness. She was shown in different poses, sometimes alone, sometimes with a man who was clearly younger than my father, sometimes holding a baby. Beneath the photographs was a document, a birth certificate. My father's name was listed as the father, but the date was before he married my mother, before he met my mother. before, in fact, he was supposed to have even left his hometown. I sat down on the concrete floor, my legs no longer reliable. I think I made a sound, though I can't remember what it was. There was more, so much more. Letters tied with string, written in a woman's hand, cursive, elegant, heartbroken. Newspaper clippings from a small town I'd never heard of, 3 hours from where we lived. A hospital bracelet. A death certificate, dated 1978. Cancer. She had died of cancer, and she had been 42 years old. The baby in the photographs would be in his mid-40s now. I had a brother, a half-brother. Someone whose existence was so completely erased that he had never existed at all, at least not in the world I inhabited. I went back upstairs in a state I couldn't quite name. Not shock is temporary, resolved. This was something else. This was the ground opening up beneath me, and I was watching myself fall through layers of reality, through versions of my father and mother that didn't match the ones I'd always known. I opened the letters from upstairs. My father's handwriting covered pages and pages. They were addressed to me, but never sent. They began in 1995 and ended in 2007, the year before his heart attack. He explained. Not everything, never everything, but enough to cast a shadow backward across my entire life. He had made a mistake. Young, stupid, reckless. He had fathered a child with a woman he didn't love in a way that left her devastated and him terrified. He had walked away. He had built a new life with my mother, and they had never spoken of it, not once in their entire marriage. But he never stopped thinking about the boy. He had watched from a distance. He had sent money anonymously for years. He had kept photographs and newspaper clippings and anything he could find that proved the child existed. And by the time the boy's mother died, my father was trapped in a marriage, bound by shame and silence, and the fear of what would happen if anyone knew. In the letters, he wrote about his plan. After his death, he wanted me to find the boy, to reach out, to tell him the truth, to give him something that might look like family or at least like explanation. I won't ask for forgiveness, he wrote. I stopped expecting that long ago, but I want him to know that he was not forgotten. He was not unwanted because I didn't care. He was unwanted because I was a coward. I want him to understand the difference. I want him to know there was someone who thought of him, someone who carried the weight of abandonment alongside the weight of his absence. The final letter was dated 2 weeks before his heart attack. In it, he wrote, "If you're reading this, I'm dead. This is the part where I ask you to do what I couldn't do. Find him. Tell him. Let him ask the questions he should have been able to ask 30 years ago. And tell him I'm sorry. Tell him his mother was beautiful and kind, and that I spent my life regretting that I couldn't be brave enough to choose her." I found my brother through the birth certificate. It led me to a name, then a social security number that appeared in public records, then a LinkedIn profile with a photograph. He looked like my father. It was unmistakable. The shape of his face, the way his mouth pulled slightly to the left when he smiled. I looked like him too, I realized. I had inherited my father's features as clearly as this man had, and I'd never questioned where they came from, because that's what children do. They accept themselves as inevitable. I picked up the phone 6 times before I actually called him. 6 times I dialed and disconnected, my thumb hovering over the green button like it might burn me. On the 7th attempt, he answered. "Hello?" His voice was uncertain, the way people's voices are when they're answering a number they don't recognize. I imagined him in his living room, or his car, or wherever he was living a life that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with me at exactly the same time. "My name is—" I started, and then I stopped. "I think I'm your sister." There was a silence that lasted forever. Then, "I think you need to call me back. I need to sit down for this." I called him back. I told him everything. About the sealed wall, the metal boxes, the letters my father had never sent. I watched my entire childhood reorganize itself as I spoke. Moments I thought meant one thing suddenly meant another. My father's absence at certain family events, my mother's frequent stares into the middle distance, the locked study door, the private phone calls, the way my parents existed in the same house but seemed to be living in different worlds entirely. My brother cried. I could hear him breathing heavily, trying to compose himself. When he finally spoke, he said something I will never forget. I always knew something was wrong with my life. I just didn't know it was because of something that happened before it started. We met 2 weeks later in a coffee shop in the city. I recognized him immediately, not because of the resemblance, though that was there, but because something in me responded to his presence with a recognition I couldn't explain. Genetics, maybe, or the echo of choices made before I was born. We didn't talk much. We sat across from each other for an hour and said perhaps 200 words total. But we looked at each other, and in that looking, something shifted. Some pattern that had been broken before I was born suddenly had a chance at being whole again. When I left the meeting, I felt lighter and heavier simultaneously. Lighter because a question that had been living under my skin without my knowing about it had finally been answered. Heavier because the answer came with the knowledge that my father was not the man I thought he was, that my mother had lived a lie so complete it had shaped the entire structure of my childhood, and that there was a version of my own life that had been erased along with this other family. I went back to the house. I removed the bricks one by one and opened up the sealed wall. Inside was a wooden chest, old and beautiful, filled with more photographs and letters, and proof that my father had loved someone before my mother, and that love had created a person who deserved to exist without shame. I restored the wall, but I left a photograph visible in the mortar, the one of the young woman holding the baby. Let the next owners wonder about it. Let them imagine stories. Some secrets are too big to carry alone, and maybe they were meant to be left for strangers to find and wonder about. I sold the house a month later. The real estate agent asked why I didn't use the proceeds to travel or invest. I told her I was going to use it to get to know my brother, to have him for Sunday dinners, to watch him teach his daughter about her family, our family, without the weight of lies pressing down from above. That's nice, she said. Family is important. She had no idea how important. She had no idea what it meant to discover that the family you thought you had was built on the ruins of the family you didn't know existed. She had no idea what it meant to look at your parents and finally see them as they actually were, not as the characters in the story you'd always told yourself, but as complicated, broken people trying to survive in the wreckage of their own mistakes. But I knew, and I would carry that knowledge for the rest of my life, and it would change the way I saw everything, every choice I made, every relationship I entered, every moment where I was tempted to hide something, to build walls, to brick things up and pretend they didn't exist. In the end, the basement didn't contain secrets. It contained truth. And truth, unlike secrets, demands to be lived with. It demands that you become bigger, wiser, more forgiving. It demands that you recognize that everyone is haunted by the lives they didn't live and the people they couldn't save. My father's ghost left the house the day I opened that sealed wall, but it stayed with me, and I think that's exactly what he wanted.